So at this point, now it's time to refine more the materials. So we have a very basic diffuse material, and we know we need to have a little bit of glossy. So shader, glossy, then shader and mix. We mix these two together by using, for the moment, our default Fresnel. Actually, if we go to material preview, you can even see kind of like there are changes happening in the way how the colors work. That actually works even better on the PC side. The new version of Blender now can actually, when you go to material preview, not only show you images but also show you a real-time preview of certain textures like the ronery or so. On the Mac at the moment it does not work, but that's fine. You can always use the rendered mode. So we have our Fresnel, we have the diffuse, maybe 0.1 or 0.05 for the glossy. I know that I need a bump mapping. So for example, I feed this one in there and there, maybe strength. I will keep it 0.5 for the moment, so I see this very quickly, and then later I can tone it down. And from the 3D wood exercise, you know, we need to have a grayscale image for the bump. The cool thing is we can actually use the image texture, and this is kind of like a quick workflow. We will add an RGB to black and white and then say this color please turn into grayscale values, and then use that for the height. So for example, Shift Z to do a rendering. I also turned my environment up so I can take a look at it. And let's see how this works. And there, see there, we can see actually the bump mapping in it. So you might have to rotate the view a little bit. And again, those things work really well when, for example, we turn off the diffuse, so we can only see the black emptiness of the diffuse and just the reflection on top. Okay. Now with distance, for example, we can adjust the distance, so the depth and then the strength. It's kind of like how strong this is. So based on the texture you have, there are certain tools we can play with. I will pump this up on purpose a little bit bigger because I would like to show you something new. So I will make a material and diffuse output, and then I patch this one in so I can see now this grayscale image result. Okay, so you know that with the color ramp we can adjust, for example, a little bit the way how things should look like. So it's one very easy way, for example, to compress or clamp the transition from black to white inside an image. And if I feed this one in, you see now first, because I get more contrast or more strength into my bump mapping, the effect is stronger, but it's also not as broadly and finely applied everywhere. So you see when I lower this and there, so that's kind of like the same. And now I set more colors towards white, and you see the more it becomes white, the more strength the bump mapping gets. And when I move the black over, you see the more I move the black over, the more black basically occupies, so I have less white, but the white is being used to cut the grooves. And what it does, what is honestly really left pocket, right pocket, because we can always even invert these values, so it doesn't really matter much. Or for example, I can invert the value. Doesn't it? I would have assumed actually it would have worked there, but okay. Yeah, no, okay. So no, or I can even do it this way if I want to. So it all doesn't, it's all subjective. That's the reason why very often I work like with those two views and then to see how does each one affect the other one. So this is the color ramp. So this one you know. But under color there's also well, gamma and brightness, hue, saturation, but there's also the RGB curves. And this is kind of like the gradation curve in Photoshop. So, oops, this has to go into there. And now I can do something similar like what we did with the color ramp. So I move white and black, but you have to be very careful with the way how many steps you take. And if I click on a line, you see, and then I can pull out a curve. So if, for example, I want to be able to create more an S transition. And if I want to get rid of one line, I can also click on it. Sorry, a point. Click the point and then click the X, and it's gone. So which of the tools you use is basically based on, do you just need a linear transition, or do you only want to affect maybe the dark areas, but then slowly or faster move to a change for the brights? Then, for example, you want to use the RGB curves, and if you only do something that's linear, then actually, for example, we can maintain using the color ramp, because again, essentially they all more or less do a similar thing. So let's put this one in there. Let's take a look. Yeah, okay. So the effect is, maybe I make distance 1 and strength 0.1. You see how this actually affects the bump mapping. So this is basically now for just the bump mapping, but again, you know, we can also use this for the roughness. So there you see that certain parts of the wood has a different roughness value. Some areas are more clean and some areas are more blurry, and that gives it later then a more let's say not so uniform look. And if we pair this together with the bump mapping, that can actually look quite charming. 0.5, so there's a little bit of scratchiness happening. Let's put the shader, the diffuse back in. Okay, great. And let's say the amount of reflection is also way too strong, because based on what type of material you use to seal the wood, we can, for example, tinker with it. So one way, bring in our math node and then multiply, and then everything from 0, 1 is 0, to 1 is 100%, and 0.5, for example, is 50%. So we can this way tone down the strength of the reflectivity. Okay, so you see, as I mentioned in the previous in-class comment, the building blocks are really always the same: diffuse and glossy, defining the color and the reflectivity. Then we have something that defines how between these two materials is mixed. We still use the Fresnel with the color mixer, and then we all drive the color through one image, and then the bump mapping we also extract from the image by turning the image into black and white, and then via the color ramp, for example, adjusting that a little bit, and then we use the bump node to create that artificial structure. So this so far was pretty easy and very repetitive to what we did before. Well, let's finish this actually with the metal pipes. So, and those maybe I would like to be on the same layer as, for example, my finished wood piece. Okay, there. And maybe all those I just put onto one layer together. You remain there. Or what, you know what, I moved you also to that layer. So here I only see the final stuff. So this actually, let's say, is chrome. Chrome is a very difficult material because all we have to do, for example, for a basic metal material, let's just make it glossy. And well, it's all white because it just shows a white environment. So let's give this maybe a ground plane, and maybe make another plane. I rotate this one to there, and this one now I make black. So you see actually my environment is nice and bright, but I need stuff inside my reflections. So I actually add those reflection boards to it, and maybe one there, and Shift D, and there, and rotate it, maybe make it a tick bigger. And let's maybe zoom into here. Let's do a rendering. There. Okay. But now I don't really want to see those silly boards all the time in my view. I just only want them to show up in my rendering. So these objects I can select, go to Object Properties, and then while holding Alt key, turn all those settings off besides glossy. Because glossy, that basically means they will show up in the rendering and only inside the reflection and nowhere else. I also don't want them to be visually solid shaded, so by holding Alt key, let's set those to wire. And for example, we can give those also a meaningful word. Blackboard. There and there. So if we now zoom in and do a rendering, you see they're gone, but actually we still see them inside the reflections. That's one of the common mistakes when people create reflective materials like metal, etc., and then they only select an HDRI image, which maybe does not have enough stuff to really texture the reflections correctly. And we can simply add reflecting boards, and then this way I can really design the reflection based from the camera angle. And because we are doing digital photography, more or less, we can trick around and, for example, simply say, well, this actually should show up in the reflection, but not be visible inside the rendering. So to go a little bit more in depth with the metal material, let's say we call this one metal or chrome, whatever. So when we zoom in, now we can see there's a lot of things happening, and we can switch this one to this version. It in certain areas darkens the metal a little bit, which is in some instances what you want. So this one or Beckham or the the GGX, you can use, those are different models for how to calculate the different reflections. Sometimes the differences are very tiny, and I will explain those more in detail when it's time to introduce them to you. But for the moment, basically maybe work with those two, and then you see here to make something blurry. You can also there just work with the roughness value in case this should be aluminum sandblasted. 0.2. Then actually here with the multi-scatter GX, you can select that as well. This is now going to sound a little bit abstract, but again, the problem in digital rendering is simply we try to simplify reality via math. So we need to write equations that create a material that simulates the look we are looking for. And when we have a very rough surface, sometimes the edges get too dark, and when we work with a slightly blurry material, we can use the GGX, and when we work with a very sandblasted surface, then we can use the multi-scatter GGX. And if we want maybe to have a more darker material, then we can use this one. Or you can also keep this one. Okay. So this was basically maybe a quick way how we do a very basic. This is not 100% realistic, but for test rendering, a somewhat usable basic reflective material. And again, reflective materials like chrome really only are very convincing when the environment also supports what you could see inside the reflections, because this stuff still here looks a little bit empty. We also don't really have a very bright object, for example like a light source, to show up. But we will cover this more when we do when we design actually a studio set for this. If I, for example, would like this to turn into, let's say, red powder coated plastic, or let's say it's a metal pipe and we have a powder coat over it, then I can actually make a new material, and let's say this will be red. Okay, so this is flat diffuse. Then I need a glossy and a mix shader there, and then I need my Fresnel. Why don't I see it? There and there. So you see when I zoom in, there you can see that certain edges are nicely more reflective and the perpendicular areas are less reflective. This red is maybe a tick too strong. And then there you see the nice changes. So this is, for example, already a very basic plastic material. So it's just a diffuse color with a glossy put over it. And then again with the Fresnel, we mix those things together. So you see, as I promised, the building blocks are always the same. It's always you deal with color, reflectivity, and the structure.